Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of OTH Sports View. I'm JP Butler alongside Times Herald sports editor Chuck Pollock. We've talked high school baseball and softball in recent weeks. We've talked a little bit about St. Bonaventure basketball and even into track and field and even some high school football. Today we wanted to switch gears a little bit and bring it to the Buffalo Bills and the NFL draft from the weekend. And so today we're here with Chuck, who is our longtime Buffalo Bills beat reporter. Sort of switching roles here. Normally when we were talking about the Bonnies, Chuck would sort of bring us in, and I'm going to do that today. So we'll get into the Buffalo Bills draft. They went into it with some obvious holes to fill. We knew that they would probably focus a little bit more on defense after some of the personnel losses after last season. That's exactly what they did. They obviously end up taking Shaq Lawson, the defensive end from Clemson, at number 19 overall. This is a guy that was sort of perceived as a top 10 pick kind of guy. They get the linebacker in the second round in Ragland. And so, just kind of focusing in on this aspect of it first, what were your thoughts on how they approached it and the fact that, in their mind, they got two guys that they really kind of thought were first-round guys, two guys that they would have taken both at 19 in Lawson and Ragland?
What's interesting about that, JP, is that every general manager will tell you at the beginning of a draft, we can't believe this guy fell. And it becomes a cliche. And it is a cliche. But you could make the argument that in this case, when Doug Whaley said that, it was true. Every mock draft I saw, Shaq Lawson was a top 10 pick. So when he's there at 19, that's awfully good value. And what made it particularly good for the Bills, that's a position of need for them, and we'll get into that later because I think people are confused. Then, in the second round, they're down at 49, and it appears that, well, they're going to get a good player, but all of a sudden they look at the draft, and day one ends, and Reggie Ragland, who is an outstanding inside linebacker for Alabama, is still there.
Right.
And that was a stunner to them, and again, Sports Illustrated predicted, Pro Football Weekly predicted that Reggie Ragland would be taken by the Bills at 19. Right. So now this guy is sitting there, and they're thinking, you know what?
At this point, and
well, interestingly enough, and Doug Whaley was profoundly honest about this. He said, we regrouped, we realized Ragland's still there, and they started going down the second round team by team, making calls. Will you trade? Chicago said no. One team after another, after another, after another said no. We don't know how much the Bills would have been willing to give up, but finally, they found a trading partner with Chicago. 2 fourth-round picks. And you can argue whether that's too expensive. We'll know in 3 years. If Reggie Ragland isn't in a Pro Bowl, then they probably paid too much. Mm-hmm. But basically, they got a first-round talent at number 41 overall. So in my mind, they got two players. Certainly, linebacker was a position of need. So that's not even that's not arguable. So they've got two very, very good guys with picks they didn't expect. They expected they'd get one of them, I suppose, and it would have been Ragland. So to get those two, it was pretty good. And the Bills don't have to make excuses when they say we're surprised they fell that far. I'll buy it this time.
Right. And I think, the fact that they were able to do that is really the main reason why most fans, I think, are, we're a little more satisfied with the way that this draft unfolded in a lot of years because of the fact that they were able to get two guys that were first-round talents, one in the first and one in the second round. And it seems with these two guys, and just from what I'm hearing, and you can sort of expound on this, that you've got a guy that in Lawson who I think they plan on basically plugging in right away and basically in Mario Williams' spot, and another that they can basically have in there over Nigel Bradham. So you got two guys you can plug in pretty much right away. I know the sort of the positioning and approach may be a little bit different this year, but is that the sense that you get, that these are two guys that they expect to come in and sort of plug in for those spots right away here?
They do. What's interesting about it is we couldn't really be sure of what the circumstances were. There was only one round on Thursday night. Doug Whaley came out, did his monologue about Shaq Lawson, and then he said he's going to be starting from day one opposite Jerry Hughes. Okay, we see that. But then he set at outside linebacker, and we found that profoundly confusing. And they take Ragland, and you say, well, needed a guy in the middle. That makes perfect sense. But then in the third round, they took Adolphus Washington.
Right.
And that was an interesting pick. Guy from Ohio State, very good player, but all of a sudden it seemed like they were overloaded with defensive linemen. Well, finally, yesterday, and by that I'm saying Sunday, Rex Ryan explained what his idea is. And now it makes a lot more sense, and what those first three guys meant makes more sense. They effectively, and I don't know of any NFL team that's going to do this in quite the way the Bills intend to, they're going to line up in a 5-2. So your front seven is just a little bit thrown off because they're thinking in terms of a three-man line, but they're going to play their linebackers close to their pass rushers. Right. So that's Lawson and Jerry Hughes. And then in the middle, Marcel Darius, Kyle Williams, Corbin Bryant, and now Adolphus.
To sort of rotate.
You've got a three-man group in there with a four-man rotation. And that sounds pretty good, and it's unconventional. It gives opposing offenses something to think about. So at least Rex made sense of something that didn't really jibe with us on the first 2 days of the draft. And then when you hear it like that, you say, well, it's interesting. Whether it works, we'll find out in September.
Right. And you also go into this draft expecting that they're probably going to take a quarterback at some point. I think Doug Whaley was pretty open about this going into it. You just didn't know when it was necessarily going to happen. You thought maybe in the second or third round, that might be when they start to look at a guy like Connor Cook, from Michigan State, and I think there are a couple of other names in there as well. They don't take a quarterback in those positions. They continue on with the defense. But then in the fourth, they take a guy who's familiar with a lot of even casual fans in Cardale Jones because of what he did 2 years ago at Ohio State, a guy who started as a third-string quarterback. The first two guys get hurt. He comes in at the end of the year and leads Ohio State to a national championship. He wins the Big Ten championship and then the two games in the playoff, and sort of becomes almost a little bit of a household name in that way. He stays another year. Maybe not as great a year last year, but they take him at the end of the fourth round, and I think a lot of Bills fans looked at that and they were kind of excited about it because, again, it was a name they knew and a guy they remember from doing well on a big stage like the championship game. What were your thoughts on that pick, and how does he sort of fit into the plans long term with the Bills?
Clearly he's a work in progress, and I know that's a cliche, but it's true. But here's the thing. I remember watching that national championship game. They're down two quarterbacks. They're starting their third-string quarterback against Wisconsin in the Big Ten championship game. And I watch him play, and I'm thinking, how does any college team have three quarterbacks that you put this guy in, and he plays at that level? Yeah. Then he goes out and beats Alabama, and then he destroys Oregon. And you say, my goodness, this guy is the real deal. He's huge. He's 6'5", 250. Pretty mobile. An unbelievable arm. Now, certainly he's rough in a lot of areas, but circumstantially, I love the pick. And for all intents, he was the Bills' compensatory fourth-round pick, which means he was the very last pick in round 4. Thus, you could argue, in effect, he's a fifth-rounder. So to get a guy of his possible skills is extraordinary to me. And what I like best about him, the Connor Cooks and these other guys who fell down and were drafted later, we pretty much know their book of business.
Right.
We don't know his. He's only started 11 games. He's won them all. Didn't look particularly great as a starter last year. Still won them and still had a good quarterback rating. I feel as if he has an almost unlimited cap as far as his skills. Certainly farther than the other quarterbacks who were drafted. So there's reason to be excited about him. The only problem will be if Tyrod Taylor gets hurt early and he's still in the learning mode, then you're going to get a heavy dose of E.J. Manuel, and a lot of Bills fans are not going to like that.
Right, and that was going to be my next thing. So I was going to ask you sort of where that leaves E.J. Manuel in this whole thing. Now, I think that Whaley basically came right out and said that Cardale Jones is going to be the third guy. I think that was one of the first things he said when they took him. And so that was kind of interesting to me, which meant that they really are going to be okay again here with going into the season with Manuel at number 2. And I thought that maybe after last year that this would be the time now that they'd be ready to move on from him, that they'd seen enough at this point. But clearly that doesn't seem to be the case. It seems that EJ's still going to be their number 2 going into the
I think he is, and I've got to say, I have a degree of loyalty to him because I liked him coming out of college. It's very easy to be dismissive of him based on a horrible, horrible first half against the Jaguars in London. But he does have skills, he knows the system, and it really kind of depends on how quickly Cardale picks up their offense. My real concern is Tyrod's ability to stay healthy, because his greatest strength is also his greatest weakness. He's wonderful on the run, but when a quarterback's on the run in the NFL, that's a putting a sign on me, kick me. And so you're never sure how long a guy's going to last. And so there is that concern. But I think teams, he being Whaley said, well, we've got the best backup quarterback in the league. Well, that's bull. But he's not as terrible as people perceive. And people do forget, as lousy as he was in the first half of that game, he got him back ahead. And it was Ryan's defense that let him down and let that game get away.
That's true. That's true. And so, you almost have to assume that, that Taylor may miss, 2 or 3 games. And so we'll see what happens there. But the last thing, just as a Bills fan, obviously, I was watching, all weekend and sort of talking with friends about it and everything. And I think a lot of us thought that this was probably the most satisfied we've been with the Bills draft in a while, because of the fact that they got 2 first-round talents in their mind in different rounds, because of the fact that, the Cardale Jones pick, let's see where that goes kind of thing. They addressed some other areas too. We didn't even talk about Liston B, the receiver that they brought on, and what sort of dimension he may be able to bring. But just overall, what were your thoughts on the draft as a whole? Did you like it? Did you think that they did a good job this year? Do you feel sort of the same way I do, that this was maybe their best? Did you leave feeling more satisfied with what they did this year than maybe in recent years?
I did, with the exception of maybe giving up too much to get to the Ragland pick with the 2 4s. But again, he can decide. He'll show us whether that was a good decision. But the reality is, the last day of the draft, Saturday's rounds 4 through 7, the Bills had no 7th rounder because they gave that up to get Matt Castle last year. But those are dice roll rounds. So the first dice roll is with a guy with, in my thinking, is an enormous upside with Jones. Then Jonathan Williams was the lead back at Arkansas until he injured his foot. The guy who took his place was drafted, I think, in the 4th round. Good player. So this guy, it was his job, and he's completely healthy. That guy's worth it. Listenby is fascinating, although he sounds to me like, in this case, Marquise Goodwin,
maybe
heavy,
a little bit bigger.
Heavy, because he is bigger. And the last pick is really the cornerback from USC is an interesting selection because of his speed. So those are dice rolls, but I came away from that thinking this is really pretty good, especially because they tried to address the things that they needed to on defense. And really, for a guy of Rex Ryan's reputation, this is a show me year. And I don't buy for a minute that he was given an ultimatum and that Doug Whaley was given an ultimatum, hey, you're out if you don't make the playoffs this year. But I believe that they have internal pressure because they're disappointed with the way last year unfolded.
Right. So there you have it, Chuck Pollock with his thoughts on the Buffalo Bills draft. They certainly addressed some needs defensively, and as they always do, have the fan base excited about what the prospects may be for this season, and we will see how it all plays out in the fall. Thanks for watching.